For 3 years, he came in just before sunrise and sat alone at booth 7. Never said much. Never asked for more than coffee, oatmeal, and eggs. Just an old man with weathered hands and quiet eyes. Every morning he left a $10 bill always folded the same way, always tucked beneath his plate. Helen was the only one who didn't rush him, didn't pry, didn't treat him like he was invisible. Then one morning the door opened, but it wasn't him. 6 Marines in full dress blues stepped into the diner carrying a folded American flag in a wooden box. That's when Helen realized. The man everyone thought was just passing time had left her something far greater than she ever imagined. Helen McBride was the kind of woman people described as steady. Not flashy, not loud, not someone you'd notice walking into a room, but someone you'd miss the moment she was gone. In her late 60s, now Helen had silver streaks in her once dark hair, a slight bend in her back from decades on her feet, and a calm, unshakable warmth in her voice. Every morning, just after 5, she unlocked the doors of McBride's diner, flipped the lights on, and began the quiet rhythm that had defined her life for over 3 decades. She and her late husband Carl had opened the place back in the early 90s, with little more than a loan, a coffee machine, and a shared dream. Carl had been a firefighter, one of the dependable ones, always first in and last out. He passed away 5 years ago after a sudden heart attack while mowing the lawn, leaving Helen with more grief than she could say out loud, and a teenage grandson, Tyler, to raise on her own. Tyler was the son of Helen's only child, a daughter who had lost her way years earlier. Drugs, trouble with the law, and a string of broken promises left Helen as Tyler's sole guardian since he was 8. He was 17 now, kind-hearted but restless, trying to figure out who he was in a world that moved too fast for boys raised in diners. The diner with its teal booths and creaky linoleum floors had seen better days, but it was still a haven for the early risers of the town: truck drivers, mail carriers, teachers, and widowers, who came more for the familiar nod from Helen than the food itself. She didn't just pour coffee, she listened. She remembered birthdays. She noticed when someone's appetite shrank or their wedding ring disappeared. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was full of quiet routines like cracking eggs before the sun came up or folding napkins with the radio humming softly in the background, full of faded photographs pinned on the bulletin board by the register, full of tiny unnoticed acts of grace. And every morning at 6:30, just as the sky turned pale and the first regulars drifted in, Helen could count on one constant: the quiet man at booth 7. It was a Tuesday in late January when Frank Donovan first walked through the frosted glass door of McBride's diner. The wind outside howled with the kind of bite only Wyoming winters could deliver, and the snow had already blanketed the streets in silence. Helen had just refilled the sugar caddies when she looked up and saw him, tall, lean shoulders still squared, like a man used to standing at attention, though he moved with a limp favoring his right leg. He didn't say a word, just made his way to the far corner booth, booth 7, and settled in with a slow, deliberate grace, like someone who knew exactly where he was going, even if no one else did. Helen approached with her usual warm smile. "What can I get you this morning?" He looked at her, his eyes a pale, icy blue, and gave a single nod. Then he quietly spoke low and gravelly. "Oatmeal, 2 eggs, black coffee," and that became the ritual. Every morning at precisely 6:30 a.m., Frank Donovan appeared like clockwork. Snow, rain, wind, it didn't matter. Booth 7 was his. He always ordered the same meal, always finished it slowly, methodically, and always left exactly $10, $8.50 for the meal, and $1.50 extra folded crisply and tucked beneath the plate like a secret he wanted kept. He never lingered for conversation, never made a fuss. Just nodded once when Helen brought his food, and again when he stood to leave. The only words she ever heard from him were the initial order. And yet, over time, Helen began to notice the quiet rhythm he brought to her mornings. In a world that changed far too fast, Frank Donovan was something solid, reliable. The other waitresses noticed him too, but not in the same way. "He gives me the creeps," whispered Julie, one of the younger girls from the afternoon shift. "Always watching, never talks." Probably a loner, another chimed in. Maybe military, or just weird. But Helen didn't join the chorus of speculation. She never gossiped, never asked questions she didn't need answered. Instead, every morning, as she poured his coffee and laid down his plate, she simply said, "Glad you're here, Mr. Donovan." He never responded, not with words. But sometimes, just sometimes, his nod lingered a little longer. And for Helen, that was enough. She didn't need to know his past. She only knew this: he came every day paid in full and never caused a moment of trouble. In her world of long hours and quiet losses, Frank Donovan's silence became oddly comforting. As weeks turned to months and months to years, the presence of Frank Donovan at Booth 7 became as much a part of McBride's diner as the ticking clock above the kitchen door or the soft hum of the jukebox in the corner. He was a fixture one Helen came to expect and quietly appreciate. She began to notice the small, unchanging details. His boots were always the same pair, well worn, but meticulously kept polished just enough to show respect without drawing attention. The creases on the leather looked permanent, like they'd walked more roads than anyone dared ask about. His hands, large and weathered, bore the story of decades of labor knuckles, slightly swollen veins, pronounced fingertips calloused from either hard work or holding a rifle. Probably both, Helen thought on more than one occasion. Most peculiar was the small, brown, leather-bound journal he always carried in the inside pocket of his coat. He never opened it at the table, never wrote in it while he ate, but he kept it close like it held memories too private to part with. She saw him take it out once, just once, when he thought no one was looking, flipping through a few pages, before tucking it away with reverence, almost like a prayer. Tyler, Helen's grandson, who had taken on weekend shifts to earn a bit of gas money, was the only one bold or perhaps naive enough to try cracking Frank's shell. One Saturday morning, after delivering his usual plate, Tyler lingered a moment, pointing to the faded military patch sewn on the left sleeve of Frank's jacket. "You serve, sir?" he asked, voice bright and curious. Frank paused mid-sip of coffee, his eyes rising slowly to meet the boy's. He gave a single firm nod. No more, no less. Tyler stood there expecting more. When none came, he nodded back respectfully, then walked off. That was the end of it. Helen had watched the exchange from behind the counter. She smiled faintly, not mockingly, but with a kind of knowing. Frank had boundaries, and the quiet she suspected was his comfort. Then came the storm. It was a brutal February morning, the kind that turned breath to fog and made even the regulars think twice before venturing out. Roads were iced over. Schools were closed. Only two people showed up to McBride's that day: Helen, because the diner was her life, and Frank Donovan. He entered at exactly 6:30, dusted with snow, his coat zipped to the chin, boots crunching over the wet floor. He gave his usual nod, sat at booth 7, and waited. Helen didn't charge him that day. She served him the same meal, added a steaming slice of apple pie, and simply said, "On the house, Mr. Donovan." He looked at her for a moment longer than usual. Then, wordlessly, he ate. After he left, Helen cleared the table. Beneath the napkin wasn't the usual $10 bill. It was a 50, crisply folded, tucked perfectly beneath the plate. Friday morning began like any other. The sky was still painted in soft purples and grays. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through McBride's diner, and Helen moved through her morning prep with quiet efficiency. She set out the silverware, refilled the sugar jars, and wiped down the counter, all while humming an old Patsy Cline tune under her breath. At 6:25, she glanced toward booth 7. Empty. No worry yet. Frank Donovan was a man of precision, but even the most consistent clocks ran a minute late now and then. 6:30. Still nothing. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee just in case. By 6:45, Helen found herself peering through the frost-edged windows toward the street, half expecting to see his figure appearing through the mist. But the sidewalk remained empty. The only footsteps that morning were the regulars: Marty the mailman, Ron the Vietnam vet, and a pair of construction guys grabbing coffee to go. No Frank. At 7:00, Helen quietly poured a cup of black coffee and placed it at booth 7. Just in case, he didn't show up that day, or the next. Saturday came and went, then Sunday. Still no sign of Frank's weather jacket, his measured steps, or the familiar nod. On Monday, Tyler came in after school and found his grandmother standing in front of booth 7, just staring, no plate, no coffee, just the silverware rolled up in a napkin untouched. "Everything okay, Gran?" he asked gently. Helen blinked and gave a soft smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired." But it wasn't tiredness. It was something deeper. A quiet ache that settled in her chest like a forgotten tune. After a full week, she finally did it. Tuesday morning, just before the breakfast crowd arrived, Helen slowly approached booth 7 with a cloth and a sigh. She picked up the unused plate, setting the mug, the fork, the spoon, and wiped the table clean with slow, deliberate care. She didn't say a word, didn't tell Tyler, didn't announce it to the staff. She just put it all away. But from that day forward, she still glanced at the door. Every morning, without fail. Part of her hoped she'd see him walk in again, brush off the cold, take his seat, and nod as if nothing had changed. But another part, the quiet part, already knew. Something had changed, and Booth 7 would never feel the same again. Memorial Day morning dawned bright and still, with a sky as clear as glass and just a whisper of breeze carrying the scent of cut grass and warm pavement. Helen arrived early as always, the first to unlock the doors of McBride's diner. She didn't expect a rush. Most people would be at parades or sleeping in, but she made the coffee anyway, humming quietly as the familiar aroma filled the space. She set a place at booth 7, not out of habit, out of hope. Then at precisely 8:00 a.m., the door opened and the diner fell silent. 6 men stepped inside, dressed in full marine dress blues. Their uniforms were immaculate buttons, polished to a mirror-shine, shoes like black glass. The youngest of them might have been no older than Tyler. The oldest, square-jawed, with silver at the temples, moved with the steady confidence of command. All conversation stopped. Forks hovered midair. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. In a town where the most exciting visitors were delivery trucks, the sight of 6 Marines entering McBride's was enough to still every sound. Helen looked up from behind the counter, heart stuttering in her chest. The man in front stepped forward. His voice was respectful but firm. "Ma'am, are you Helen McBride?" She nodded slowly, her breath catching. "Yes, I am. I'm Captain Daniel Hale. We're here on behalf of Frank Donovan." The name hit her like a blow to the chest. Captain Hale carefully reached into a leather case and removed 3 items: a folded American flag, a polished wooden box about the size of a Bible, and a sealed envelope with her name written in strong, slanted cursive. Helen didn't speak. Couldn't. Her fingers trembled as she accepted the flag, brushing it to her chest like something sacred. She didn't even realize her eyes had filled with tears until one fell and darkened the envelope's edge. The diner stayed quiet. No one moved. The Marines stood at attention, silent but present, as if guarding more than just a memory. Captain Hale leaned in gently. "He left instructions, ma'am. Specific ones. He had no immediate family. He said you were the only person who saw him." Helen swallowed hard, pressing the envelope to her chest. I need a moment," she whispered, voice tight. She disappeared into the back room, flag and letter in hand, while the diner remained still as stone. Behind the swinging door, Helen sat at her husband's old office desk, hands trembling as she unfolded the envelope. Inside, the letter began in clean, deliberate handwriting. "Dear Helen, if you're reading this, it means I've gone to meet my wife again." She covered her mouth with one hand, already crying. Because even before finishing the first line, Helen knew Frank Donovan hadn't just left her a letter. He'd left her everything that still mattered. Helen's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter, careful not to smudge the ink already blurring from her tears. The paper was thick, cream-colored, the kind people don't use much anymore, chosen with intention. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, with the occasional tremor betraying the hand of an aging man who still took pride in precision. "Dear Helen, if you're reading this, it means I've gone to meet my wife again. My name is Francis Daniel Donovan, though you only ever called me Mr. Donovan, and I preferred it that way. For 29 years, I served as a Marine Recon Commander. I led men through some of the darkest corners of the world, places I don't talk about, and memories I try not to carry. I received medals, citations, promotions, all of them sitting now in a drawer no one has opened in years. I lost my wife Claire to cancer 15 years ago. We had no children. We tried for years, but some things just aren't meant to be. When she passed, the world became a much quieter place, and I did too. For a while, I thought that was the end of anything meaningful in my life. I had no family left, no community, and no one waiting on the other side of a door. I wasn't lonely for conversation. I was lonely for acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't come with fanfare or questions, just the simple kindness of being seen. That's what you gave me. You never asked about my limp, never pushed me to talk. You just poured my coffee, brought my eggs, and said, "Glad you're here, Mr. Donovan." Every morning you greeted me like I mattered, like I wasn't just some old relic taking up space in the corner booth. You gave me dignity. I watched you, Helen. You didn't just do your job, you served with a grace I haven't seen since the military. I saw you help single mothers juggle babies and hot coffee. I saw you patiently repeat orders to a man with early memory loss. I saw you give free pie to a stranger who clearly needed it more than he could admit. You didn't do those things for attention. You didn't post about them. You just did them because it was who you were. And to someone like me who had been forgotten by most of the world, that meant more than any parade or flag ceremony ever could. So I've left you a few things. Inside the wooden box is my service journal, my real one, not the redacted version, the government archives. There's a Purple Heart awarded after an ambush in Kandahar. I was wounded, but 5 of my men made it out. That's the only part that matters. You'll also find my Bronze Star and a small photo of you taken from across the diner pouring coffee at booth 7. One of my men took it. He wanted to know who the lady was that I talked about like family. And lastly, there's a fund. It's not much by today's standards, but it should cover at least a year or two of college for your grandson. You spoke of him often. Tyler, right, I remember. I know this may feel sudden or undeserved, but please don't turn it away. This is not charity. This is gratitude. You gave an old Marine something no pension, no medal, no ceremony ever did. Peace. Thank you, Helen McBride, for giving me a place to belong when the rest of the world had forgotten I was even here. With respect and deep thanks, Francis D. Donovan, United States Marine Corps, retired. By the time she reached the end, Helen's tears were silent steady. The letter slipped slightly from her hands and fell onto the desk. She didn't rush to pick it up. She just sat there, holding the flag to her chest and whispering softly, "You belonged here, Frank. You always did." The next morning, long before the first pot of coffee finished brewing, Helen arrived at the diner with a framed note, a folded flag, and a quiet sense of purpose. She moved through the restaurant without speaking, her steps slower than usual. The sun had only just begun to rise, casting golden streaks through the blinds and across the linoleum floor. It was the same light that used to land on Frank's shoulders as he sipped his coffee in silence. At booth 7, Helen carefully placed the flag, the one folded by the Marines, with such reverence in the center of the table. Beside it, she set a simple wooden frame containing a handwritten note. He sat here every morning. He never asked for anything except kindness. No fanfare, no announcement, just that. She didn't explain it to the regulars. She didn't have to. Within days, word had spread through town. First quietly in whispers between mail carriers and barbers, and then through social media posts, local veterans groups, and a photo in the window that Tyler printed from his phone. Booth 7, people began to say, was where the Marines sat. Veterans from different eras started stopping in. Some wore their patches. Some wore no indication of service at all, but Helen could tell. The way they stood a little straighter. The way they looked at the flag before they looked at the menu. One man, a Vietnam vet in a worn denim vest, left a tattered unit patch folded neatly beside the flag. He didn't speak a word, just nodded to Helen and walked out into the morning sun. Another left a pair of dog tags linked around the base of the napkin holder. Some came just to sit. They didn't order. They didn't eat. They simply slid into the booth, placed their palms flat against the table, and stayed for a few minutes, heads bowed, eyes closed, before rising and slipping out as quietly as they came. Tyler started keeping a small book under the counter where people could write messages if they wanted. Some were brief, semper fi, brother. Thank you for reminding me I still matter. Others told longer stories of their own service, of loss, of survival, things they hadn't spoken aloud in decades. Helen didn't touch the table anymore. She didn't clean, it didn't move anything. She simply dusted around it and made sure the sun still fell across it each morning, just the way Frank had liked it. No music played near booth 7. Not anymore. The jukebox stayed silent when that corner filled. It became a kind of sacred ground, a place of memory, a space for reflection, not grief, not exactly. It wasn't about mourning Frank's death. It was about honoring how he lived quietly and with dignity, and how a little kindness at the right moment could echo far beyond what anyone imagined. People didn't come to take photos or post online. They came to remember. In Booth 7, once just another seat in a small-town diner had become something much more. It started with a single envelope, no return address. Just the words, "For Mrs. McBride," scrawled in firm block letters. Tyler found it wedged into the diner's mailbox one Thursday morning and handed it to Helen with a curious frown. Inside was a folded letter written on plain-line paper. No formal greeting, no signature. Just this: "He once carried me 3 miles through desert heat after I lost my leg to an IED. I told him to leave me. He told me to shut up and hold on. Said it was nothing. It wasn't. It saved my life." Helen read it 3 times before slipping it quietly into the small leather-bound journal Frank had left behind. She kept it under the counter now alongside the guest book Tyler had started. But the letters kept coming. Some arrived in envelopes with military postmarks. Others were slid through the door in the early morning hours. A few were handwritten while others were typed and signed simply with initials. All of them shared a similar theme: stories of Frank Donovan's strength, his leadership, his selflessness. One man wrote, "He once stayed behind with me when I was pinned under rubble in Mosul. Everyone else had pulled back. He dug me out with his bare hands. We never talked about it again, but I think about it every time I see the scar." Another shared, "He saved my brother in Fallujah. My family never got to thank him. I guess this is me trying." Helen tucked each letter into the journal, preserving the words as part of the legacy Frank had entrusted to her. What had started as a quiet remembrance at Booth 7 was becoming something larger, something sacred. Tyler, curious about the man his grandmother spoke of with such reverence, finally sat down with Frank's journal one evening after closing time. He expected dry mission notes, maybe military jargon he wouldn't understand. What he found instead broke his heart open. There were entries about sandstorms that lasted for days, about young men Frank had led into battle and written home about when they didn't make it. Notes about cold rations, failed comms, and the weight of decisions that could never be undone. Some pages were barely legible ink smudged with water or maybe tears. And then there were softer entries. One page simply read, "Booth 7. She called me Mr. Donovan today again. She looked me in the eye like I was still a man worth knowing." Tyler didn't speak as he read, didn't ask questions. He just turned the pages slowly, the gravity of Frank's quiet courage sinking in deeper with every line. It struck him then, the same man who had rescued soldiers from fire and rubble, who had fought battles no one would ever know about, had come home and chosen silence. Not because he was weak, but because the noise of the world didn't match what he'd carried inside. Frank Donovan didn't need to tell his story. He had lived it. And now, through these letters, through the journal, through the people who returned to Booth 7, not just to remember but to heal, his story was being told anyway. One act of kindness at a time. Helen stood in the doorway of McBride's diner one quiet morning before opening time, gazing out at the empty parking lot. The sun was just beginning to rise, its early light catching the edges of the window panes and casting long shadows across the floor. She clutched a cup of black coffee in both hands, not for herself, but for Booth 7. It had become a ritual now. Each morning she brewed the first pot a little earlier than she needed to pour the first cup and set it gently at Frank Donovan's table. She no longer called it Booth 7 in her mind. To her it was just Frank's table, a quiet place in the corner where dignity had once sat without asking for anything. As she looked at the table that morning, the folded flag, the framed note, the growing cluster of mementos left by strangers, she couldn't help but reflect on the years that had passed with Frank sitting just feet away from her, unnoticed in the deeper sense. She had always been kind. She'd always tried to serve people with grace and patience. But now she wondered how many others like Frank had walked in and out of her life, bearing stories too heavy to tell, wounds too deep to show, and how many times had she missed the chance to see them. Frank had left her more than a flag and a letter. He'd left her a purpose. That realization settled into her soul like a final puzzle piece. She thought about how much meaning he had found in those quiet mornings, how much it had mattered just to be seen. So she made a decision. She printed out a small sign on plain white paper, laminated it herself, and taped it neatly to the wall just beside the register. It read, "To all veterans, your coffee is on us, every morning until 9 a.m. No need to explain. You've done enough." She didn't make a big announcement. She didn't post about it online or alert the local news. She just taped it up and waited. And they came. one by one. A Navy vet with trembling hands and a Purple Heart on his ball cap. A retired Air Force mechanic who never said much but always nodded at the sign before taking a seat. A young woman in fatigues who sat in the corner cradling her coffee like it was holding her back together. Some said thank you, others just smiled. But all of them saw the flag at booth 7. And all of them, whether they knew the story or not, seemed to feel what it meant. Booth 7 remained untouched. No orders were taken there. No dishes were cleared. Tyler once offered to polish the table, and Helen gently shook her head. It's perfect the way it is. Instead, people left small tokens, unit pins, handwritten notes, even a service medal placed beneath the sugar jar. A living memorial not frozen in time, but carried forward in quiet, reverent gestures. For Helen, life still moved on. The eggs still sizzled on the grill, the coffee still brewed by the gallon, and the register still rang. But something inside her had shifted. She had been given the rare gift of knowing that her simple kindness, something she never thought twice about, had changed the ending of someone's story. And now, through Frank's memory, she had a reason to keep doing it. For every veteran who walked through her door and just needed a place to sit and feel human again. Booth 7 was still empty, but it had never felt more full. In a world that moves faster than ever, we often overlook the quiet ones, the men and women who ask for nothing, who sit in silence, who carry their stories in folded journals and old boots. But as Helen McBride learned, sometimes the most extraordinary lives are lived in the shadows of ordinary days. Frank Donovan didn't need applause. He didn't need a parade. He just needed to be treated with dignity. That small act of serving someone with respect can still ripple through the lives of others long after we're gone. And maybe that's the lesson for us all. In today's world where division feels louder than unity, we have the chance every day to choose kindness, to see someone not for what they say, but for who they are. Whether it's a veteran at a diner, a neighbor we pass without a word, or a stranger sitting quietly in the park. What would it cost us to say, "I'm glad you're here"? Booth 7 may be just one corner in one small town diner, but maybe your life has a Booth 7 too, a place or a person you'll never look at the same way again. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever met someone like Frank Donovan? What small act of kindness has stayed with you all these years? Leave a comment and share their name. Let's remember them together. Thank you for joining us in this story. If this touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet heroes among us. And next time you're out, take a moment to really see someone, because you never know who's sitting quietly, waiting to be remembered.